Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. And before I get to our guest here today, I'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Brittany Diamond on the podcast. She's a pro strong woman coming to us all the way from Massachusetts, where, I know everyone, since we have guests like Jody Lyons on, where, they have that strong accent. I even discovered before we started recording this podcast that, she unfortunately doesn't, but hey, it's fine. So we got another guest, at least from Massachusetts, on, but most importantly, she's our current guest. Brittany, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me. And I think it's fortunate I do not have a Boston accent. So
absolutely. It's like with some friends that I hang out with. It's like it's one of those things where you wonder, like, when you're not hanging out with them, like, why don't I spend more time with them? And then when you spend like 15 minutes with them, you're like, oh yeah, that's why. I think that's like kind of like what a Boston accent is, where like people yearn to hear it. But if that was in your life 24/7, you'd be like, okay, this is just absolutely bad. But so the first question that I always ask every guest: what is the weather like in Massachusetts today?
So today it is rainy and about 65 degrees or so. So I know it's nice where you are. It's been beautiful. I love this time of year, finally getting a little bit cooler and approaching fall. But yeah, it's raining out today, but that's okay. I had a lot to do today, a lot of recordings and phone calls. So minus my morning dog walk, I've spent the majority of the day inside. So that's okay.
Yeah, and that's perfectly great. And I got to ask too, being that you're from Massachusetts, before we get into, your journey, what is your reaction like without having Tom Brady on the Patriots this year?
Yeah, it's pretty bummed between him and Gronk. I am a pretty big Patriots fan. I actually live in North Attleboro, which is the town next to Foxborough, the stadium. So yeah, it's pretty bummed. It's going to be very weird, but
I'll just tell you exactly what I told Jody. Count yourself lucky, because I am a Minnesota sports fan. My 26 years on this planet, not one of the four major sports teams have even made it to a championship game. So count yourself blessed and lucky that you at least have something to cheer for. Whereas being a Minnesota sports fan, I always basically chalk it up to, it's just basically like punching yourself in the private parts continuously. And thinking that it's not going to hurt, basically. That's basically that's the best way I can describe it. So, but before I get into that, because, that's just a whole thing that I don't even want to get started on. But Brittany, why don't you give us your backstory on what really inspired and motivated you to, start this journey and how that's evolved to where you're at right now?
So when I was young, very, very young, I started running as a way to cope with just how I grew up. Not necessarily a bad childhood. I have a great, great mom, but parents were divorced. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of moving around. And my mom was always big into fitness, and I found that I enjoyed running. I enjoyed, I didn't realize at the time that it was endorphins that I was seeking, but I loved it. I just liked that. It helped kind of calm me down a little bit. I had a lot of built up anxiety, frustration, and I just had a lot of energy as a kid. So that helped me. And so I was always a runner in middle school, high school. Unfortunately, so my game plan, I had dreams to go to the Olympics, become a sprinter, very high dreams. And I obtained an injury, I had an injury with my hamstring my junior year running, and it just felt like a broken dream. And when I injured myself, I just knew it was pretty bad. It was it was a fully torn hamstring. So kind of changed my game plan a little bit, did some research, ended up, to make a long story short, I ended up going to University of Rhode Island, and I was Division I rower, because through some research, I found that Division I rowing was the one sport that you could actually walk on and never have had experience and be able to earn a merit-based scholarship because of that. Because a lot of kids in college, don't want to wake up at like 5 a.m. So I was fortunate that I had a little bit of experience with a different type of rowing, because I grew up in Gloucester, Mass, which has steamboats on the ocean. So completely different. But I talked to the coaches. They saw my passion for pushing myself. They saw that I was strong. So I did that. And that's where I really fell in love with lifting. I had started lifting young, like 8th grade. I went into the weight room. I grew up working at the YMCA in a weight room, but it was when I was in college when I learned the compound movements, squat, bench, deadlift. And it was just the aspect that I could get better at something, and it was completely solo. my background being a runner, I was used to being solo. I liked that 100% of the pressure was on myself. In rowing, there were several other women in the boat, and it was very hard for me, being the type of athlete and the type of mindset I have, to know, like, okay, I'm giving 130%. Is everyone else? So, yeah, I fell in love with lifting. And when I was a junior in college, I was working part time during the summer. My junior year, going into senior year, I found a contest that was called Boston Strongest. And that was my very first novice strongwoman competition. I literally, Ryan, I had no idea what I was doing. I just thought I was strong and I went. And that's honestly how my entire journey started. I fell in love that day. It gave me the same adrenaline that running did. I just loved everything about it. The people, the camaraderie. It was my sport. So I knew that I had one more year. So at this point in time, Ryan, I was done with rowing. Like, I was just checked out. I was literally just doing it because I didn't want to come out of college in a shitload of debt. Being completely blunt. Of course, there were aspects. I love the people and it taught me a lot. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. But I was just mentally checked out. I had strong women on my mind. So I knew that as soon as I graduated, I was going to dive all in the sport. And that's exactly what I did. I graduated in 2014. And since then, I've competed in, I don't even know how many shows. I've competed at the world level 4 times, became pro in 2017, and have made a side, well, actually, it's now my main business. It was a side business for a couple of years. It's now my main business, coaching others in it. So to say I'm passionate about it is an understatement. It's my life.
Yeah. And that's awesome. And just a quick tangent here, because it's a fascinating fact, is that, so, you went to school in Rhode Island. My grandpa's from Rhode Island, but I'm a direct descendant of Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island.
Oh,
So
no
yeah,
way.
see, that probably rings a bell for her, because no one else would know that. But yeah, we did an ancestry thing, and it's like, oh yeah, all the way back to Roger Williams. So that's, and then my grandpa's like, well, it's probably why I was born in Rhode Island. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff named after him there. Whenever, so anyone that's listening to this from Rhode Island, they know what I'm talking about. But everyone else, are like, who? I don't know who that is. But I was in a history class, and someone did bring that up, because we were talking about like the founding of the country, and that was a cool little thing for me. So that's just a quick little. The moment anyone says Rhode Island to me, I always have to bring that up. I'm that one guy who's
That's
like,
awesome.
oh, did you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's awesome. But one thing that I love to talk about, especially when it comes to, just genetics, is a thing that I'm so fascinated by, especially with this, type of guest that I have on, is that, everyone always has that one body part that really, really takes off when they get started working out. And then everyone always has that one body that just lags behind, that they have to, just train to oblivion to catch up. What were those body parts for you when you really got started in the strong woman training?
So for strong women, it does not matter what you look like. It's how you can perform. But as I've dabbled. I've, unfortunately, because of Corona and a surgery I had to have, I've prepped and I've made it to the very end of bodybuilding physique show. So that's something, again, how I looked was just always a byproduct of how I performed. But when I started, when I transitioned into bodybuilding, obviously had to be more aware of certain body parts. So for me, one thing that was very hard was flaring out my lats. And that's because of my rowing background and because of strong women, my traps are so abnormally large, because if you think about like farmer's walk and just lifting heavy things, and of course rowing, it's like my traps are very big. And that takes away from the flow of how a physique competitor should look on stage. You really want to have those lats spread out. So learning to, because I have lats, but learning how to activate them and how to show them off for the stage has been quite the challenge. So it's definitely something I'll always work on.
So when it comes down to also, I love to ask about clothing options. How hard of it is it for you to fit in that jean shirt if there's right now with those big lats? Because that's one thing that we hear about all the time. Like if you have big shoulders, clothing options can be very, very limited for you. Is that been a struggle for you too?
Oh yeah, no, when I was in the corporate world, I can't tell you, it was almost humorous how often I would rip my clothes. There's a company right now, and this is from it. It's called, I'm drawing a blank. I should know it. Fran Denim it's called. And it's apparel that's made specifically for the athletic build. So it's nice and stretchy, and it's bigger in the places it should be. So that's usually one of the companies I go with. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Like if I have to go to a wedding or something, I kind of, need extra time get something tailored. So
Yeah, well,
at this
that's
point, I'm used to it though.
hey, I mean, yeah, like you said, it's something that you really just have to adjust to. But were you always sort of in the stronger category when you were even a kid growing up? Because I find that a lot of people that are in, strength competitions, they tend to just be genetically blessed with that it really, really helps them. So when they really start to train seriously, it really just unfolds from there.
Yeah, definitely. Growing up, I remember one time I did cross country and track, and I remember my cross country coach in middle school had me stand up, and he had another girl who was very, petite stand up, and he pointed out, he's like, Brittany's built more like a sprinter. And it was funny because looking back, I was actually like back then it was funny. I was very, very, very skinny up top. Like I remember being self-conscious of it because I had such big legs, but I had like no arms or no shoulders. That was a goal of mine once I got older, was to kind of catch up my upper body with my lower body. So I'm half Italian, half a couple other things, but I joke that I have like a Sicilian back, workhorse back. So yeah, definitely kind of the knack, obviously hard work and dedication too, but I definitely have the genes. So
Yeah, I'm an eighth Italian myself, so I can remember those spaghetti dinners, every Sunday. Yeah, gee. I mean, yeah, I mean, bodybuilding if you're Italian is even harder just because of all the food that you're expected to eat being an
oh,
Italian.
I
So
know.
I mean, I always say God bless all the Italian bodybuilders out there. But for these strong woman competitions, I mean, what would you say is probably one of the biggest misconceptions that the general public might have about these competitions? Because a lot of times, I mean, I don't mean any offense, but you look at some of these competitors, and some of them look like they maybe have never even worked out a day in their life. I compare it sort of like powerlifting, where I always find it funny where some of these guys that I'm like, oh, has he ever lifted? And then he goes in and he benches like 500 pounds. I'm like, okay, how is that even possible? It's just so fascinating. But what's a myth that you deal with a lot being in the strong woman community?
Yeah, that is definitely one of the myths. Like people will be like, you don't look like a strongman competitor or this. And I say, if you look at the different categories, especially I'm in the middleweight woman. And I think oftentimes people just think of the heavyweight men because they're the ones, of course, they get the most notoriety because they're the ones like deadlifting 1,000 pounds and doing something insane. Where the middleweight woman, it's more like I have to be an athlete. I have to be able to move well, have agility. I have to be strong. And, so it's just kind of a different aspect that people don't often see. And I also take pride in being an athlete. And because I dabble in a few different sports, I do take pride in what my physique looks like. So even when I'm prepping, for strongman, I still follow a diet to some degree, not like a bodybuilding diet, but I don't just eat how I want. And I also pretty much always do cardio because I love it and I like how it helps my body feel. So that's definitely a big misconception.
Well, you brought up the next question I was going to ask. How did your nutrition differ from your bodybuilding diet to your powerlifting diet and your strong woman diet?
Oh, yeah, huge. I mean, I eat a lot more as you should because, the bodybuilding diet isn't something normal. It's an extreme sport. And so I'll, carb cycle, I'll get really low on calories because performance when you're bodybuilding isn't the goal. It's literally how you look. Um, when I'm in strong woman or powerlifting or any other sport, I am fueling to perform. So a lot more carbs, a lot more calories. Nice. Both. I like both aspects.
How much did your strength decrease when you went into bodybuilding? Was it significant, or were you able to keep a lot of it?
no, no, I think that's another misconception is people think that you're going to get weaker, and no, I didn't actually get to the process of stepping on stage because, like I said, because of COVID, and then I had a broken wrist both when I was 4 weeks out. So I made it pretty far. I definitely will step on stage at some point. And that's when I've heard, from other competitors that the last 4 weeks are the worst. But I was very impressed because a lot of people said their strength had already felt like it gone down. But no, I was just as strong. The biggest difference was just how I was recovering. Like oftentimes when I was doing a heavy lift, I felt very dizzy because of the lack of food, and my legs just felt like lead because I was doing an hour of cardio. So, but no, I think that's just a mindset thing. Once again, if you think you're going to get weak when you're a bodybuilding prep, then you will. If you believe that you can keep your strength and keep pushing and bringing that 100% intensity to your training sessions, then you're going to, keep it up.
Absolutely. And I mean, the one thing that I've had on this podcast, I think is closest to, the strongmen and the strongwomen is CrossFitters, where I think, for your events too, you don't necessarily know ahead of time what the events are going to be. So how do you like to do your training so that you're a well-rounded athlete? Because I mean, if they say, like, hey, you're going to have to lift this, really big stone, and then next thing you know, you're going to have to be doing something that's completely different. How do you keep yourself so well-rounded so that no matter what they assign to you, I mean, that you're going to be able to do it?
So I always know there's going to be some type of overhead, some type of deadlift, some type of moving event, and then some type of loading event. So what I do for training is I try to practice all of that, and I will touch various implements like a stone or a log or an axle. But at the end of the day, the longer I compete, the less I worry about what implements there are, and I concentrate more on just building the strength. Because if I can, of course, there's a technical aspect of it, but at this point in my strongman career, I've touched all the events there are to touch. And it's sort of like riding a bike where, maybe I won't touch a stone for a few years, but I'll always remember how to pick it up. And yes, you want to practice, but like I said, I've been doing this long enough that when I'm in prep, sometimes I won't even touch events because they're so taxing on your CNS until closer to the actual event date. So great question. I hope that answered it. I could really go into it.
100%. Yeah, you always just have to be well-rounded and just make sure. But yeah, there are some things like you said, like, yeah, they're not just going to throw one thing, not just all of a sudden going to be like, oh, here, the javelin throw, you guys are going to do that now. Or they're not just going to, they're not just going to, do one thing on it that, you've never done before. So yeah, but I mean, just the lifting technique can be so different. I mean, especially when you're picking up those stones and you really got to put your whole body into it. Unless you're using stones, I mean, I don't think you can really replicate that. So, I mean, if you don't have access to equipment like that, how would you, let's just say even for that lift alone, how would you be able to replicate, that feeling? Because if you're doing a regular squat, that's nothing compared to, having to use your entire body literally to lift something up.
Yeah, definitely. So, I've become pretty creative in my training for that. And when I help other competitors that might not have access to the equipment, so things like a giant med ball or taping a sandbag and just, getting really creative. Luckily, we have the internet, so there's plenty to see. And there's also different types of lifts. Like, yeah, a squat won't feel like a stone, but there's something called like a Zercher squat where you're deadlifting it off the floor, then putting it in your arms and then lifting it up. So there are certain movements that will help mimic it to some degree. So I've just become, aware of what they are.
And being that you also, train and work with people who are, interested in the strong women, strong men competitions, what would you say is probably the hardest thing that people deal with when they first get started with you as a client?
The hardest thing is people becoming frustrated with the process of building strength because it's, if you looked at a chart, it's up and down. Like there are some weeks where everything feels good, weight moves well. And then the next week, all of a sudden it's like, why in their mind, they're not as strong as they were last week, but there's so much, so much data to look at, if they recovered, if their CNS wasn't, if they weren't sleeping, if they were stressed out, there's a lot of things to consider there. So people are just giving up a little bit too soon rather than, staying for the whole process is probably something that I see often.
Well, you brought it up, and it's the number one thing when it comes to recovery, and it might be the most important thing overall is sleep, where, I mean,
yes,
it's so undervalued, and people don't talk about it enough as they should at least, but how do you get your proper amount of sleep? Because I know, especially when you're training these high intensity workouts and stuff, sometimes I try to go to bed and I can't even sleep just because I'm so sore that it's just hard. But how do you get your recommended amount of sleep? And what advice would you have maybe for someone who's saying, like, hey, how do I get that sleep? Because I mean, that's the difference between a great workout and, a horrible workout, where, I mean, I always say there's no better feeling in the world than if you get a proper amount of sleep and you wake up feeling like a superhero, basically. But what is that like for you?
Yeah, no, definitely. And sleep is one, people always ask about like, what should I take? What should I do? And oftentimes the simple things like sleeping that they're not doing. And it's something that I've struggled with for sure, because like you said, you do, and oftentimes in my schedule, I'll work out at night so that it feels like I'm so hyped up still. So what I try to do and what I've learned over the years is to meditate a little bit before bed and learn how to wind down. So, after training, I try my hardest not to be on my laptop or watch TV or be on my phone. I try to do something like reading for a few minutes. I also take magnesium, which just helps calm everything down. And then sometimes like in prep, it's really like in bodybuilding prep, it's even harder to sleep because you're so hungry. So that's when I get, I take like vitamin C, which can help your body metabolize caffeine. And I'm conscientious to not drink, coffee or have any pre-workout after a certain time. So just little tips like that, but definitely the screen. I think limiting screen time has helped me immensely, and trying to stick with a schedule of when I go to bed and wake up.
Which stinks for me, yeah, oh yeah, believe me, you're preaching to the choir, but I mean, this for me is a game changer. Melatonin, it's
Oh,
something that,
melatonin, yes.
oh my God, yeah, it's been so much better for me because I'm naturally a night owl. Because I mean, before I got furloughed, which I'm furloughed for the next 2 weeks, I work nights, so it's for me. Yeah, I always find it fascinating where some of these guests come on, they're like, "Oh yeah, I get up at like 3 or 4 in the morning to start my day," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to bed at that time." So it's always,
Yeah.
it's always fascinating. But so yeah, sleep, I cannot understate that enough. But for becoming a pro, I mean, for bodybuilding, everyone knows that you compete a show and you win and you get your pro card. But for strong women and strongman competitions, how do you become a pro? Do you have to win a show, or do you have to win an event, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's the same. Obtaining your pro card is the same as it is in bodybuilding. You have to first win a show at a local level, and then you'll make it to the national level. And sometimes the national level, it might, the rules change. It depends how many competitors there are, it depends on the circumstances, but there might be, 1 to 2 of the top tier will get their pro card at the national level. Or the Arnold is a big one where people get it. And there's other like World's Strongest Woman, there's certain things to get there. So in general, though, you have to qualify at a local show and then a national show. And then at the national show, there's another step. So it's usually like a 3-step process. And, usually it takes a few years. You're not just normally going to go and win your first state show and then just make it. So it usually takes people a few years if they can make it that far.
What was that feeling like when you realized, oh my God, I'm a pro now?
That for me, I had a moment where I was like, finally, because I had missed it before by small technical errors that I'd done. Like, I know I deserved it. I know I was one of the strongest athletes. And I remember I was at the Arnold in 2016, I believe it was, where I was in the top tier. And then it came down to the last event. And because of something I did, there was an event where I didn't place the keg. It was like a medley type of thing. I didn't place the keg exactly on the mat. There was a part of it that was hanging off. And because of that, the judge waited, like he told me, like, hey, that's not on. So the timer didn't stop. And by the time I realized it, I think like 10 seconds had gone by, which 10 seconds in a foot race is like, you're out of the game. So I went from, being at the top, and that was an event I knew I could have won and secured my spot. But I went from, in that particular event, I think I went, it bumped me down quite a few points. So that was a hard one to swallow. But then I came back the next year and I was just very, I learned from my failure. I never made a technical error again. And I came back hungry and with more determination. And that's when I got my pro card. So yeah, just added fuel to the fire.
One thing that the powerlifters do that I think is so fascinating, and I was always wondering if the strong community does it too, is smelling salt. Do you do smelling salt at all before any of your meets or lifts?
So ammonia, I've tried it a few times for deadlifting, and the purpose of ammonia is to use on a person when they're passed out to get them, their senses aroused so that they are conscious. So I've done it a few times. Not necessarily the biggest fan of it because it's just very intense. I feel like it distracts me. So I'd rather just concentrate, and use my adrenaline rather than pneumonia. So great question.
Well, I've always said too, like the only reason that I was ever aware of that was, from every single football movie from the 70s, 80s, and 90s where they used that whenever a player got a concussion or something like that. So and then once I found out that, powerlifters were using it, I was like, okay, I might want to try it. So one of these days on the air, I think I'm going to try it and see what it's all about. But I've had people that, have had mixed, well, as you can tell, I'm hyper enough as it is. So I don't even know what that's going to do to me. So who knows? I mean, maybe I'll be able to talk, like a million words a minute. I mean, that's still up for debate here. But I mean, the big elephant in the room, coronavirus. I mean, it's been something that's impacted our entire lives and changed it. And I mean, like I said or like you said, you were, getting ready to go on stage for a show. I mean, we've had so many stories that are similar to that, but I mean, other than that, how has this whole pandemic impacted you? Because I mean, for me specifically, it's the mental thing for me even more than anything else, because as you can tell, I'm a very talkative person. So, not being able to see people in person and talk to them, I'm going crazy. I'm not going to lie. I think I've already gone crazy. I'm already past that point of no return, but I've just embraced it now. But how have you been dealing with this whole pandemic?
Yeah, great question. I think everyone in the world has been affected by it. And I feel like I'm finally at a good place with it. At first, it's inspired a lot of change for me. So I always like to say, you have to kind of be at a bad spot to reach a better place. I think that the failures and your weaknesses in life, teach you how to be more present and teach you how to get out of that. And like any strong person, mentally and physically, if you want to make a change and get out of that bad spot, you will. Not always easy, but you will. So I was in a pretty bad spot. I actually lost a job that I absolutely loved. We were working remotely. I was very shocked, to say the least, because they kept us on working remotely for months, March, April, May, June. And then it kind of was just a shock and they let us go. But luckily, I've always had a side business. So losing that job was an opportunity. And now what I'm doing is I am taking my side business and I am blowing it up, turning it into my main career, which has always been a dream of mine. I just needed a kick in the ass, quite honestly, to get started. So that's what I'm doing. But there was a lot of dark days, I will say that. And, I've heard other people's stories. I'm very empathetic towards what everyone's going through with Corona. It was almost like we regressed as a society, if you ask me, with the riots and people hating on the cops and just all, the media blowing things out of proportion. So
I am 15 minutes away from where George Floyd happened, and that's all I'm going to say. So it impacted this area a lot. So yeah, that was, yeah. So it's been like my friends say though, it's like, what a time to be alive. But when it comes to the working out aspect, I mean, were gyms closed around you, and how did you get your fix? Because I always say, a bodybuilder, the gym is their crack basically. I mean, they can't go without it. So what was that been like for you?
great way, great way to put it. Yes, because the gym was my happy place. And yes, they were all closed around me. And it was even harder because I was a month out and I was so lean. Your body is in a very weak state at that point because you're at a level of body fat that's not natural. Your body wants you to eat more. So it took literally every ounce of strength. There were some nights where I just wanted to binge, and I've never had an eating disorder, never had a problem, but I was in that starvation mode for so long that in being stuck at home, it's like all I wanted to do was devour all the food. And there were a couple nights I did cave and ate way too much peanut butter, so I would just remind myself. I took cardio outside and gathered some weights, did a few home workouts, and I was very, very fortunate that one of the gyms near me, because I host seminars and have always helped out and worked part time a few times a week at certain hours when it was like quote unquote safe, I was able to go with other employees and the owners. So I feel so lucky that I was able to do that. If not, I still would have made it work. There was a couple days, where and I actually released a program for people to work out at home, and I encouraged like get creative, like rice bags. You can get some pretty heavy rice bags at Stop and Shop, and luckily that wasn't like toilet paper; it was still available. So just to get creative, just move your body. And I reminded myself and my own clients that taking a few weeks off, as long as I'm still somewhat active, it's not going to derail my years of training. Muscle just doesn't go away in a day. So I just had to, even though you feel like it does mentally, because as you worded it, and you called it crack, and it's like, yes, working out is an addiction and an outlet. So I completely understand that. And that's why a lot of people did go crazy.
Oh, I was going to say, I've actually been trying to downsize the last couple of months since coronavirus started, because I was getting so big that, I just had some trouble, just even like falling asleep, like sleep apnea, stuff like that's like, and even me, like going on these long walks or long runs, I still have a lot of it left. I barely lost any of it. So I can be the first one to say, yes, it's true. And they say that, it's very hard to get rid of, that muscle after you've worked years on it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't have honestly put it better myself. But I mean, going that you we're this close to competing and then, all this stuff happened. Do you have any days in mind or any, like a timeline in mind of when you might want to step on the stage again, or when you want to do the next strong woman competition? Is there any goal, like of a day in mind that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely plan to compete in bodybuilding next year. And a lot of the I know I'm not a pro in bodybuilding. I'm just an amateur, never even done it. But the pro shows for strongman are supposedly resuming. So I'm waiting for the dates. There should be one in the fall. I'm not sure if it's World's Strongest or America's Strongest. It just kind of depends, on the rules for where competitors are allowed to go. But I do plan. I'm just very hungry to compete. Like, I didn't realize how much it fuels and drives me towards other aspects of my life. Like, I feel like when I'm competing, I'm so in the zone and so focused that it helps me in a business aspect, in life, and just overall being a better person. So I am very eager and very excited. And I will even have more of an appreciation for the gift of being able to compete, since it was taken away from all of us. And I hope every athlete, approaches it like that too.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if someone were to come up to you and say, Brittany, we made the decision, you can change one thing about the strong woman lifestyle and everyone would go along with it, what would be one thing that you would like to see changed?
One thing I'd like to see change would be, and it's something that I've worked very hard to already change, is that the men at the pro level get so much more attention, so much more sponsorship. And I realize it's because, no matter how strong a woman is never going to be able to compete, with like someone like Thor or Brian Shaw, where they can literally deadlift over 1,000 pounds.
And if they can, I want their training program.
Yeah, it's just not, something that's going to happen. So just numbers wise, it's like, it's amazing. Sometimes pound for pound, a woman can be stronger for sure, but the average person, doesn't know anything about lifting or weight. It's just like when you hear that number or see it, it's like, wow, that's insane. So I hope that starts to evolve. It's already made, a positive turn. Women, when I first started, weren't able to get their pro card, and I was very vocal about that. I actually spoke to NPR once about women being able to obtain their pro card, and Dion Wessels, the president of Strongman Corporation, fought really hard to get women, what they deserve. So I'm thankful for that and the direction it's headed. But of course, like anything, Title IX exists, so still striving towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the pound for pound thing, yeah, absolutely. The only problem with that is that when people say pound for pound, it's like, yeah, the guy weighs like 250 pounds more than the woman, woman. Though. But yeah, believe me, I've had powerlifters on here that, were like 100 pounds females and they were benching, like almost like 180 or something like that. So I was like, yeah, pound for pound. Yeah, that's pretty close to, what any guy can do. So yeah, and I mean, yeah, it's just unfortunate. And that's why, I love having a lot of female athletes on this podcast too, as any way to help promote them, because yeah, like you said, it does really stink that, the guys tend to get a lot more of the sponsorship and a lot more of the attention. So, anything that I can do to change that. But if we were to talk to you a year from today, where would you like to be at in, your fitness journey? Where would you like to be at just in your overall life? What are some goals that you would like to have achieved if we were to talk to you a year from today?
So by September of 2021, I plan to have stepped on stage for the first time. I'm approaching it like third time is the charm, very unlucky that, the corona was out of my control, of course. So I just, take that for what it is. Every athlete was impacted by it. But the year before that, I broke my wrist and had a couple surgeries, I just felt like, my God, I've gone through this process, twice, because I am a pro in a different sport. No matter what sport I'm doing, I'm still going to approach it with that same mentality, same dedication. Like, I am all in. I'm not taking shortcuts. I'm doing it because I want to. So it's just been really hard for me to go through with something like that and then not get the prize, because the stage is the prize. It's like you worked your ass off for this. That's the fun part, the competition. So yes, by next year I'll have stepped on stage, because I've already, I already have my suit. I've already learned to pose. I even went as far as picking a song and working on my routine. So yes, by next year, I can hopefully successfully say that I've stepped on stage.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's so great, and we wish you nothing but the best in that. And I honestly just think you're going to do great. But I saved this for the very end because I didn't want to lose 90% of our viewers. But what are some of your best lifts? I know this is going to embarrass everyone, so I had to save it for the end.
No, it's okay. So, my best lift. So in strongman, there's different events, but the one most people know are squat, bench, and deadlift. My best back squat ever was 425. Um, Front squat 365, deadlift 465. I'm really chasing 500 at some point in my life, and bench 220. I never hit the 225 yet. So there you go. That's some of my best lifts. Not that strong right now. That was when I was purposely competing with the goal of being strong. Right now, I'm just more focusing on being an overall athlete. So
It's still very impressive stuff. So and that's
thank you.
and that's amazing. And before we wrap things up, is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, so I know you had Jody Lyons on here in the episode before me. She is someone that I feel very lucky to have met on my journey. She helped me a lot with posing. She was my routine coach, so she's someone that helped me. And then Josh Bryant of Jailhouse Strong is someone I work very closely with. He's helped me with overhead press specifically. He's coached me. He has a powerlifting background, so we work really well together. And then my original strongman dad, I like to call him, is Eric Dawson, who owns Titan Barbell. He is the reason I strive to be like him. He is the most humble individual, one of the strongest people in the world, but also the most humble, kind, gentle giant. So I've learned a lot from him. So yeah, those are three people that have really impacted me, as well as Justin Randall. He's a pro competitor in the bodybuilding world, and he's been he's helped me with the diet and all the aspects of it. And, he's been very empathetic towards me when there's been two things where he's helped me. And he's, helped me a lot. So yeah, those are the four people that I'd like to give a shout out to.
Well, and that's just so great. And I mean, I'll leave a link to all that stuff down below for anyone to go and give it a follow. And everyone, go check out Brittany too. I mean, I highly, highly recommend it. Now, buyer beware. You will get, embarrassed, and you will, get inspired to get off that couch and stop eating all those Twinkies and, get in shape. I'm just warning everyone ahead of time. But, Brittany, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I mean, I really, really appreciate it. And I honestly think you're going to do great. And I just watching some of her videos, I was like, okay, yeah, if she ever decided to go really hard in bodybuilding, she could really do a lot. And in strongwoman too. I mean, because those lifts are just so impressive. But thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. Have a good day.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing out. Have a great day, everyone.